Hello, my name is Anil Shrestha and I'm a professor in the Department of Plant Science here at California State University, Fresno. Today we are going to talk about a very intriguing topic, ecological agriculture. Now, the problem is that there are so many forms of ecological agriculture that it gets very confusing to people. Terms such as sustainable agriculture, biodynamic agriculture, agroecology, organic farming, regenerative farming, permaculture, and so on. So the objective of this video is to try and see if there are any similarities or are these systems really different. So hopefully we can discuss this in this video. As I was saying, there are various forms of farming systems based on ecological principles. I've tried to summarize some of these, such as based on terminology. So the terms such as sustainable agriculture, organic farming, biodynamic farming, permaculture, regenerative agriculture, regenerative organic agriculture, permaculture, carbon farming, conservation agriculture, holistic resource management, nature-based solutions, and agroecology. Now, this may not be the entire list, but I'm going to talk about some of these systems. So let's start by talking about sustainable agriculture. Now, to define sustainable agriculture, I'm going to use the definition of the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture definition. It is defined as an agricultural system intended to protect the environment, expand the Earth's natural resource base, and maintain and improve soil fertility. It is a system, in essence, it's a system that is ecologically sound, economically viable, and socially acceptable. Now, I tried to summarize some of the key practices of sustainable agriculture, and these include integrated management of natural resources, soil, water, etc., that are included in these natural resources, promoting biodiversity, using energy efficiently, reductions in emissions, and fostering community well-being and economic fairness. So these are some of the key practices that I kind of summarized from the definition and the text on sustainable agriculture. Moving on to organic farming, it's defined again. I used the government definition of organic farming. It is a production system that is managed to respond to site-specific conditions by integrating cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that foster cycling of resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity. Now, in organic farming systems, the major principles that I have summarized here based on the definition is maximizing the use of the ecological systems, building soil health, and certain things are prohibited in organic farming systems. For example, you cannot use synthetic fertilizers and pesticide. Sewage sludge is also disallowed, and the use of genetically modified organisms are also not allowed. And then for pest protection, they suggest using prevention and management techniques such as crop rotations, habitat management, planting pest resistant varieties. And organic farming goes beyond just crops and also have organic systems for animal agriculture as well. So they talk about animal health and welfare also among the principles. And once you get started in organic farming, you are supposed to kind of follow these principles and continue organic management. Otherwise, you lose your organic certification. Now, when it comes to the organic farming, you can use certain products that has to be certified by OMRI. And if you go to the website, you'll see that only the products that are certified by OMRI are allowed to be used in organic systems. So the OMRI is a list of substances that are allowed for use in organic systems, and I have provided you the web link, and you can also find it on the web easily. The other point I want to make about organic farming is the labeling options. Often it gets confusing when you see these labels like 100% organic, organic, made with organic ingredients. So I just have this slide here trying to explain that. 100% organic means it must contain 100% organically produced ingredients. That does not include water and salt. Other than that, it has to be 100% organically produced ingredients. The other labeling system is organic, which means that the 95% of your ingredients used in the farming system must be organic ingredients, and again, it does not include water and salt. Now, the third type of label is made with organic ingredients. Now, this one is a little different in this case, in difference in the sense that only 70% of what is used is organic ingredients. So again, it does not include water and salt. Now, to make organic farming more clear and discuss about the applied aspects of it, we interviewed Mr. Tom Wiley, who is he has retired now, but he was the leading organic farmer in the Central Valley. So, in the next clip, we'll show you an interview with him and his thoughts about organic farming.
So, as a student in agroecology, we are constantly faced with definitions on various ecological farming, with organic farming being one. You, as an organic farmer that has been in the Central Valley for a long time, how do you define organic farming, and what is your philosophy on organic farming?
Well, all of these different practices of farming, they're all agriculture. And agriculture is an experiment that we've been conducting for about 10,000 years, which is only 5% of our history as a species. And I'm not really into dividing agriculture into all these different subdisciplines, kind of like we do in academia. But we have a tendency to do that. And the modern organic movement started probably here in about the 1950s with Robert Rodale, who founded the Organic Gardening and Farming magazine. And he kind of funded the initial definitions of organic farming in California around 1963. And out of that came California Certified Organic Farmers and a handful of farmers that were either startup farmers from ground zero or possibly farmers from generational families that started changing their practices into more what I like to call natural systems agriculture, with less dependence on chemical inputs, both in fertility and pest control and disease control, and a greater reliance on the use of cover crops and compost and the natural recycling process that the planet works on to sponsor productivity in agriculture. And, you know, it was a difficult start because we had very, very little knowledge. And even when I became involved in it, around 1980, our knowledge base was still very, very shallow. We didn't really understand the definition of compost or quality inputs, and we just didn't have very many resources. But we kind of stumbled along, and we created an event that's been going on for 45 years, the Ecological Farming Conference in Asilomar, that we have every January, and we would meet and get together and share our experiences of success and failure with each other, and then go to our respective corners and farm again for another year. And that went on for 20 25 years. while we were basically laughed at by our neighbors and discredited by the universities as to what we were up to. And but the system has evolved into a greater understanding of these natural processes, and the universities have come around to paying attention to the need to take more toxics out of agricultural production. So, and along the way, organic became legally defined first in California by the state of California Department of Food and Agriculture, and then around the year 2000, it was kicked up to the USDA. And so now the definition of what qualifies as certified organic is ensconced in the USDA. It's called the National Organic Program Rule. And so it's very well defined, but unfortunately, defining it so succinctly and in such legal terms has allowed it also to become kind of picked apart. And so now we have industrial organic. It's not just hippies anymore. The larger farming community has got interested in being producers of organic, but because a lot of the pressures from the food system to have things in abundance and at very cheap prices, some of this industrial organic has minimized the rules and kind of eliminated the use of compost and cover crops, which was the basis of the fertility practice of organic agriculture, very fundamental practices. So everything is in constant transition, and so that's maybe a short history of the modern organic movement, at least here in California.
So, in your own words, what is the difference between regenerative ag and organic farming?
Mm-hmm. Well, regenerative agriculture is something that is maybe evolved out of the conservation agriculture movement, which is an attempt that maybe started in the 1960s to do no-till agriculture. And the ability to do no-till agriculture was pretty dependent on the invention and the availability of herbicides so that you could control weeds without doing tillage. In more recent times, it's kind of becoming synonymous with the soil health movement, which also emphasizes a great deal the reduction or elimination of tillage. That is not something that was recognized in the organic movement as an important feature of biological farming. We were actually more dependent on tillage than conventional farmers because we couldn't use herbicides, or we didn't have any effective herbicides. So we had a tendency to be more intensive in our tillage than in conventional farmers, and certainly in no-till conventional farming. So that movement eventually became known as the regenerative movement. And I think that the original philosophy of organic farming included all of those concepts, other than that of reduction or elimination of tillage. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, the industrial organic movement has moved away from cover cropping and the use of compost. So organic is diverging from regenerative concepts in that respect and deserves criticism for doing that. But I think that there's a much more greater similarity in those two systems, organic and regenerative, and I think they will eventually, need to increase their crosstalk and their collaboration. And then, of course, both of those movements need to have greater influence on conventional agriculture as well. But some people see organic and regenerative as adversaries. To me, it's not an either or kind of a situation. It's a situation in which we need to collaborate and come together for the improvement of agriculture as a whole. Yeah. So I don't see a lot of conflicts there. we have a tendency to create conflicts where they don't necessarily need to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What advice would you give new or organic farmers that are interested in becoming organic farmers, or those in the near future that are planning to?
Well, if you truly want to be a natural systems farmer and really rely on biological systems, then I think what you really have to rely on is finding a constituency in the marketplace that will support your efforts and your desire to do things in an appropriately biological way. And if you can't get economic support for what you're doing, you'll either dilute your mission of how you're going to practice agriculture, or you're going to fail. So you have to find people who will support your efforts, and that to me is very critical. And then of course you have to educate yourself. You know, it takes a lot of learning, a lot of study, and find mentors, find people that are more experienced and more knowledgeable than you, that you have a lot of respect for. And if you're a beginning farmer, it'd be wise to go to work for those people and learn how to avoid mistakes before you make them on your own and put yourself out of business. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Learn from others.
Towards here in California.
That's a little difficult to say. If the marketplace continues to demand it to be as cheap as food is from our industrial production systems, then it will probably be watered down to a tremendous degree, which it's already being. However, you know, we do have a cadre of what you might call legacy organic farmers who have, you know, stayed with the tried and true principles of organics and have applied scientific understanding and are trying to evolve in a more natural systems direction. But they have to find a unique marketplace, either in farmers markets or community supported agriculture systems or direct relationships with customers, or at least individual stores, in order to support the prices they need to keep them in business doing things in a deeply biological manner. That process is going on right now. It's really a little bit hard to say, to pin the tail on the donkey and say where organics is going. There's some, you know, bad trends in the organic marketplace going on, and there are some good trends as well. And so it's hard to say. I think the question is open.
Well, thank you so much for the answer.
Is there anything you want to add?
Well, were you asking? Yeah, well, even though I made my living in organic agriculture, and organic agriculture created a subset of the marketplace for those of us who were early practitioners to thrive, at least for, you know, 25, maybe 30 years. I have since become much more interested in the question of agriculture than I am in the practice, the exact practice of organic agriculture. Wes Jackson, who I consider an intellectual mentor of mine, who ran the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas, I like to use his quote that we keep getting distracted by the problems in agriculture instead of focusing on the problem of agriculture. And the problem of agriculture is basically, was it a very good idea to give up being hunter-gatherers 10,000 years ago and, you know, basically hack nature to do agriculture? It looks like it's very productive, and it feeds 8 billion people today on the planet. But are we going to be able to continue to do that indefinitely without destroying the natural systems that agriculture bases its productivity on? And I think that we're on the knife edge of that right now. And organic has some valued inputs into a potential solution to permanent agriculture in harmony with natural systems. Regenerative has some contributions. Biodynamic has some contributions. Conservation agriculture has some contributions. We're going to have to put our heads together as a species to see if we can make this thing work long term. Otherwise, we're going to have to invite a lot of people to get off of the planet, or we're all going to go down together, one or the other. So that's a much bigger issue than organic, regenerative, conventional, all these definitions that we distract ourselves with.
So let's talk about biodynamic farming. It is a system very similar to organic farming, but it includes various esoteric concepts drawn from the ideas of Rudolf Steiner. It was Rudolf Steiner who initially developed this system in 1924, and in this system, it treats soil fertility, plant growth, and livestock care as ecologically interrelated tasks, emphasizing spiritual and mystical perspectives. Some methods use an astrological sowing planting calendar, and they use herbs and minerals in compost and field space. They prepare these by using methods that are more magic than agronomy. They bury the mixture in the ground with quartz and stuffed into the horn of a cow, which are said to harvest cosmic forces of nature. So that's the principle of biodynamic farming. So the principles of biodynamic agriculture, first of all, it views the farm as a self-sustaining living organism, which emphasizes soil health, crop and animal diversity, and the integration of farm elements to create a balanced ecosystem. The principles include regeneration, integration of nature, plants, animals, and humans, well-being of animals while producing nutrient-dense food, nourishing the soil, and protecting wildlife. It views agriculture more contextually of its ecology, landscape, and culture. And it also talks about ecological responsibility and social responsibility as well.
My name is Gina Nonini. I am the owner or proprietor, or steward, I should say, of Marion Farms. We're about 140 acres. We have 40 acres of vineyard, 40 acres of pecans, 40 acres of almonds, as the city folks say. Not quite 8 acres of citrus, and I have a little bit of open land in general. So we pick and pack under our own label most of the time. We have a 5,000 square foot distillery that we make distilled spirits, both high proof for medicinal uses and medical uses, and a beverage line. All the land that I farmed was originally conventionally farmed, chemically farmed, and I started in 1992 in biodynamics. Biodynamic farming is the oldest farming system, recognized farming system, I should say. We were around long before regenerative. We were around long before organics. I'm sure you'll find some folks that may disagree with me, but biodynamics is a system of farming that we work in harmony with nature. We live in a culture of death in many ways, specifically in farming. Conventional farming, they're always trying to kill something, kill a bug, kill a weed, kill a fungus, kill something. They're always in a confrontation with Mother Nature. Organics, I should say, old school organics is very similar to what we do. New school, big O, as I call it, big organics, is more along with input substitution. What can I be to be certified organic? What inputs can I use? So it's not too different from conventional farming. And so what we use is what we call biodynamic preparations in our yearly routine of growing not only fruits and vegetables, but livestock and whatever the agriculture. We actually live the culture that's missing today. It's gone from agriculture to agribusiness, unfortunately. And I recognize money makes the world go around and pays our bills. I'm not against it, but we seem to be focused on that, and we've lost sight of quality. Everything now is quantity, because that's how growers are paid, and whatever it takes to get the quantity is where most people go. The four main thing I would like to in biodynamics is first there's a paradigm shift in your thinking. You have to see the world a little bit different. We're dealing with formative forces, etheric formative forces that are out there. And so first you have to change your thinking. What separates us from organics and the other forms of agriculture is we also use what we call biodynamic preparations, which are substances made from plants and animal materials. They go in the compost pile, they're sprayed on the land, they're sprayed on the plants at different times. You're trying to affect certain change. The third, we work with the cosmos. We work with the rhythms of the seasons. There are seasons of the year, there are seasons in the month, and there are seasons in the day. And we work with, for example, full moon. Everybody knows things get kind of crazy around full moon, and the moon affects the tides in the ocean. That effect doesn't stop on the beach, it rolls inland and affects everything else. And so we have our own calendars that we work with when we're applying biodynamic preparations, when we're making preparations, and when we're actually trying to engage in agricultural practices as best we can. The last is a whole farm organism. We see the farm as an organism, not just a revenue generator. And so we diversify. That's why I have 3 or 4 different things that we're growing. It's not an easy task. Most everybody is just monoculture. They're either growing 1 or 2 things, and that's all they do. They specialize in those things, and farming has become very scientific. Again, the culture is missing. They've added the business part on the back end of the word agra. And so in biodynamics, we try to stay to the traditional ways of doing things. It's becoming more and more difficult as the marketplace is changing. It's consolidating. Big O has pretty much taken over everything in the organics. 30 years ago, when I started doing table grapes and started doing this, you could make some decent money in what we do. And the market recognized us a lot more, I think, in the beginning. Now it's just been flooded with organics. And honestly, as a movement, we have not done a really good job in telling our story. We do our best here with the media you have, for example, websites or whatever. I've tried to talk to various buyers, but the market is changing very quickly, and it's becoming more consolidated, making it more difficult in the marketplace. But we still continue because I've done it because it's the right thing to do long before there was a market. You spend a lot of time educating people. There's a lot of room for that. There are some folks out there that are close to what we're doing. For example, the Real Organic movement. I don't know if you've talked to any of those folks. A lot of those folks, not all, but a lot of those folks are doing some of the practices that we do in biodynamics, the whole farm system. They're just not using the preparations. There's a future, I think, an opportunity to tap into some of those folks. Young people, I would encourage. The challenge with biodynamics is you're not dealing completely with substances. With the conventional and with organic, you're working out of a can or a box. You're buying something to do something on your field. When they spray on the field, when they spray stuff on the field, whether it's chemical or organic materials or whatever, they're looking for contacts on leaf contact to affect the change. Biodynamics is on our preparations, you're using a teaspoon or a tablespoon of a particular preparation, whether it goes in the compost pile or whether we use it on the land, so it has a homeopathic effect. Small substance, large change, because you're dealing in the world of energies. Now people say that's kind of a woo-woo or voodoo or whatever. It's not. For example, one of the challenges we have, we don't really have an instrument to measure etheric forces, but that doesn't mean they're not there. And so most people are from Missouri, as I would say, the show me state. Unless they can physically see it or touch it, they don't necessarily believe it's there. You know, before they had the Geiger counter and some of the ways of measuring radioactivity or EMFs or whatever, those things were always there. Now we have a way of measuring them so people, in some sense, believe they exist. In the case of etheric forces, look around you. Mother Nature, we've been granted this beautiful gift by God. In biodynamics, we work in harmony with Mother Nature and God. I'm not here to try to compete or destroy. I really see it as a dance in a way. You have to work with the weather that's been provided, with the year that's been provided to you. I see the farm as a great symphony, and the farmer is the conductor. God writes the score, the music score, and you use your plants and your animals and your livestock and your domestic life, your wildlife and your livestock, even the earthworms in your soil and bacteria. Everything that's been given to you is your symphony as a conductor. Now it's up to you to have a beautiful sound. It's not always easy, and every year is different because the weather deals you different dynamics. And so whether people believe it or not, it's here. You just have to pay attention, I think. And I think most people are just kind of caught up in the day-to-day living and what's in front of them. But biodynamics I wouldn't farm any other way. I've been doing it since 1992. and I would encourage young people to consider looking into that. You're going to have to get stuck into anthroposophy and Rudolf Steiner because he's the one that came up with it. Some people have issues with that, and that's fine, whatever you feel comfortable with. Organic seems to be a lot more parochial and mainstream for people, so people are more accepting of that. Regenerative, I have my own viewpoints on regenerative. I think regenerative is the new word sustainable, since they beat that dead horse down, and before that it was the word natural, and they beat that down. They had to come up with a new word to sell, but even the major corporations have co-opted the word regenerative, so I don't really think it really means much. But when you look at the regenerative standards, and I have, before I knew it, I'm looking at these things, I'm thinking, wow, this is Demeter standards. These are biodynamics. Demeter is the certifying agent for biodynamics. And I'm looking and thinking, wow, in the production side of this thing, there's a lot of biodynamics standards here. Come to find out, that's what my understanding is, that's what they started with. They started with Demeter standards when they made the regenerative ones, or some of the folks. I know there's different standards for different organizations, but the actual true regenerative agriculture is biodynamics, because man can't do it. You need God's help, and you got to learn how to work with the universe. You have to work with Mother Nature in this sense. And by using the preparations, they're not a fix-it-all. You're trying to change the dynamics. If there's something off, for example, in the springtime, mildew is always an issue for table grapes and grapes in general, based on the temperature, based on dew points, based on humidity, based on a number of things. You're trying to prevent mildew from occurring on your grapes because it causes problems later. We don't use any chemicals at all here, with the exception of dusting sulfur as a prohibitive against mildew, but we also employ a whole panoply of preparations in trying to prevent. Mildew belongs in the ground, it doesn't belong in the plant. And so we try to use and force that mildew back down in the ground where it belongs, instead of the environment of the plant life.
I would like to briefly define what carbon farming is all about. So carbon farming is a term coined by the European Commission, and it is defined as a green business model that rewards land managers for taking up improved management practices that result in increase of carbon sequestration and in living biomass, dead organic matter, and soils by kind of enhancing carbon capture, and also by reducing the release of carbon to the air. And it kind of also talks about promoting biodiversity, and the emphasis is mostly on increasing carbon sequestration, improving soil health, and in reducing agricultural pollution to mitigate climate change. But I also saw that these practices seem to rely on economic incentives in the form of carbon markets. So these are the things that I found in literature about carbon farming. So what are the main principles of carbon farming? According to literature, the main principles of carbon farming include reduction in synthetic fertilizer use, planting cover crops, eliminating bare fallow soils, improving the efficiency of farming systems, reducing tillage, increasing the production of cover crops, improving residue management, and agroforestry. So these are some of the main principles of carbon farming. I would like to talk very briefly about holistic resource management, another form of ecological agriculture. The term holistic resource management was developed by Alan Savory in the 1960s, and what it is, it's more of a decision-making system to manage resources primarily for grazing systems, and it's more about animal agriculture. I also found in literature that some perceive this to be the application of permaculture principles into rangeland management. Now, what holistic resource management seeks is to regenerate degraded soil and plant life in grazing systems. As you can see in the background here, this is some grazing land in Fresno State. Now, another form of ecological agriculture is conservation agriculture, and I looked up information from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, and it seems that they were the ones who coined the term conservation agriculture in 1990s with the idea of minimizing soil disturbance that was originally seen during the Dust Bowl, the US Dust Bowl in the 1930s. And if I were to kind of restate the definition that I found, it is a farming system that promotes minimum soil disturbance, and that is, it kind of focuses on no-till, maintenance of permanent soil cover, and diversification of plant species, and it enhances biodiversity and natural biological processes both above and so below the ground, and also the process contributes to increased water and nutrient use efficiency and to improved and sustainable crop uh, production. Now, the three main principles that conservation agriculture seems to profess is minimizing mechanical soil disturbance, having permanent soil organic cover, and species diversification. So, for more information on conservation agriculture, we interviewed a researcher who has been involved in conservation agriculture for decades, and Dr. Jeffrey Mitchell from the University of California, Davis, and we are sharing his views in the next clip.
Hello, good morning. We are here at California State University, Fresno with Dr. Jeff Mitchell. Hello, good morning. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Jeff Mitchell, and I'm a cropping system specialist and researcher up in the Department of Plant Sciences at UC Davis.
So how would you define conservation ag?
Conservation agriculture is an agricultural management system that is based on three agroecological principles. And these are reducing disturbance, keeping the soil covered, and accentuating or enhancing, to the extent possible, biodiversity in the system. And that is accomplished by having a diverse set of crops that you're growing and crops that you introduce into the farming system, and also by accentuating the biodiversity in the soil as well. So enhancing soil life and the quality of biodiversity. Of conservation agriculture are generally sourced back to the 1940s and 1950s. First of all, in the Midwest of the United States, when farmers were facing really big issues with erosion, the erosion of soil to the wind and by water erosion. And also later on in South American countries of Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. Farmers ended up being really up against the wall. They couldn't allow soil to be lost from their farms. And they discovered with researchers that if you preserve residue, if you cover the soil with crop residues and cover crop residues, that you can prevent an awful lot of that soil erosion or soil loss. So that was really part of the original genesis or beginning of conservation agriculture. The term conservation agriculture was first introduced into the scientific literature in about 1997. So it's fairly recent, but earlier than some of the other terminology that you've been learning about in this film.
So Jeff, you mentioned various principles of conservation ag. How do these principles differ from other ecological farming systems?
Okay. Well, first of all, there are a number of practices that are involved with typical conservation ag systems, and these include the deliberate reduction in tillage, all right, reduce disturbance, so you're not going to be tilling the soil a lot, keeping the soil covered by residues from previous crops, and also by the cover crops that you introduce into your system there. Cover cropping is another important aspect of conservation ag systems. Deliberate reduction in tillage, as I said, And also it's the combination of these practices, not using any single isolated practice by itself, but combining the whole suite of practices that is very important for achieving conservation agriculture outcomes.
So, Jeff, how do these practices differ from other ecological farming systems?
Very good question there. I think in a lot of ways, conservation agriculture is the precursor, or it has been the globally recognized system that came out quite a long time ago there. So that's one thing. Historically, it predated a lot of the more recent systems and the hype that we've been paying attention to, some of the other things such as regenerative ag and everything. But fundamentally, the principles and the practices of conservation agriculture, those are based in agroecology. And they're the kind of things that these other systems, soil health that was introduced in the United States formally by the NRCS in 2012. And as I said earlier, more recently, the term regenerative agriculture that was officially introduced, if you will, and began gaining much more momentum and attention in about 2017. So by and large, all of these terms are essentially talking about very similar practices. Now, keep it rolling here. My next thing here is, so now we might want to think about the question, why aren't we seeing more of conservation agriculture in California? Why do you think that would be? Well, I think one obvious answer is that farmers, by and large, who are growing annual crops or row crops or field crops that are planted every year, they haven't had the experience of dealing with surface residues. They don't have the equipment. We don't have a lot of no-tillage or strip tillage, high residue preserving practices and pieces of equipment that have been available to farmers in California to implement these kind of practices. So that's one thing. The familiarity just hasn't been there. It's also, secondly, it's also pretty risky and pretty challenging to just wholesale up and change what you've been doing very successfully with phenomenally high yields for so many years and suddenly jump into making changes towards something like conservation or regenerative ag or these kind of systems here. So the risk is very high as well. Thirdly, California has such diversity of crops. I mean, think about the hundreds of crops that farmers in California are growing, and very successfully, by and large. That diversity, we don't have successfully demonstrated systems that are going to work crop to crop to crop using these CA or conservation ag principles. So a lot of challenges have surfaced that I think it's fair to say have precluded a lot of adoption of conservation ag in California right now. All right, so keep it rolling here now. What that might say, however, is there are going to be opportunities and challenges for the next generations of workers, of farmers, of consultants, like many of you who are looking at this film today, to really add your skills, your creativity and ingenuity to the evolution of cropping systems in our state. And that's going to happen very likely because society is going to demand that. We are going to need to take care of our resources on the planet, first of all, to preserve the resources and the resource quality, to cut costs, to be economical in our production systems. And as my own mentor, a guy that's probably done more for conservation ag or regenerative ag in our country than anybody I know out of South Dakota, a guy named Dwayne Beck, is very fond of saying, we need to keep the long view. We need to consider the kinds of cropping systems, of agricultural management systems that we want to have, and that maybe more importantly, that we're going to need to have way out in the future. Not 3 years, 5 years from now, but 200 years. What are those food production systems going to need to look like? And that's what we, and you particularly, are going to need to develop.
So, Jeff, how do these practices differ from other ecological farming systems?
Very good question there. I think in a lot of ways, conservation agriculture is the precursor, or it has been the globally recognized system that came out quite a long time ago there. So that's one thing. Historically, it predated a lot of the more recent systems and the hype that we've been paying attention to, some of the other things such as regenerative ag and everything. But fundamentally, the principles and the practices of conservation agriculture, those are based in agroecology. And they're the kind of things that these other systems, soil health that was introduced in the United States formally by the NRCS in 2012. And as I said earlier, more recently, the term regenerative agriculture that was officially introduced, if you will, and began gaining much more momentum and attention in about 2017. So by and large, all of these terms are essentially talking about very similar practices. Now, keep it rolling here. My next thing here is, so now we might want to think about the question, why aren't we seeing more of conservation agriculture in California? Why do you think that would be? Well, I think one obvious answer is that farmers, by and large, who are growing annual crops or row crops or field crops that are planted every year, they haven't had the experience of dealing with surface residues. They don't have the equipment. We don't have a lot of no-tillage or strip tillage, high residue preserving practices and pieces of equipment that have been available to farmers in California to implement these kind of practices. So that's one thing. The familiarity just hasn't been there. It's also, secondly, it's also pretty risky and pretty challenging to just wholesale up and change what you've been doing very successfully with phenomenally high yields for so many years and suddenly jump into making changes towards something like conservation or regenerative ag or these kind of systems here. So the risk is very high as well. Thirdly, California has such diversity of crops. I mean, think about the hundreds of crops that farmers in California are growing, and very successfully, by and large. That diversity, we don't have successfully demonstrated systems that are going to work crop to crop to crop using these CA or conservation ag principles. So a lot of challenges have surfaced that I think it's fair to say have precluded a lot of adoption of conservation ag in California right now. All right, so keep it rolling here now. What that might say, however, is there are going to be opportunities and challenges for the next generations of workers, of farmers, of consultants, like many of you who are looking at this film today, to really add your skills, your creativity and ingenuity to the evolution of cropping systems in our state. And that's going to happen very likely because society is going to demand that. We are going to need to take care of our resources on the planet, first of all, to preserve the resources and the resource quality, to cut costs, to be economical in our production systems. And as my own mentor, a guy that's probably done more for conservation ag or regenerative ag in our country than anybody I know out of South Dakota, a guy named Dwayne Beck, is very fond of saying, we need to keep the long view. We need to consider the kinds of cropping systems, of agricultural management systems that we want to have, and that maybe more importantly, that we're going to need to have way out in the future. Not 3 years, 5 years from now, but 200 years. What are those food production systems going to need to look like? And that's what we, and you particularly, are going to need to develop. So what you're seeing here, this is actually very little residue. All right, yes, the soil hasn't been disturbed, but there's not more than probably 1,000 pounds of residue per acre left on the soil surface after this small grain crop here. So ideally, you'd be needing to regenerate this kind of residue to cover the soil more often here. And another thing that I didn't mention earlier is another important practice would be extending the period throughout the year where you have green living plant cover. So keeping the soil biology active, and so that you're feeding the microorganisms there. So that's another principle that I didn't mention earlier. So we could probably eyeball this and it might look like maybe 25, 30% of the soil. You got a lot of exposed, brown soil here, maybe a little bit more here. But scientists have found over research that at least 30% of the soil needs to be covered in order to stop erosion. So that's kind of like a minimum target to keep the soil at least 30% covered. But that's uncommon in California. You're not going to see a lot of farmers plowing into or planting directly into this because it's not easy to do that.
Thank you for coming here today with us, Dr. Jeff Mitchell, and sharing this important information. I know a lot of people viewing this film will really take this information and use it very well.
Thank you, Jennifer, very much. I'm honored to be.
Now, another form of ecological agriculture that I found in literature is natural systems agriculture, and there is something synonymous called nature-based solutions. This is a little different in terms that it is a system defined by the Land Institute in 1977, and there's a paper by Wes Jackson on natural systems agriculture. So it seems the main feature of natural systems agriculture is to mimic the natural structure and function of farming system. And I also saw in that paper that the emphasis is more on perennial crops and increasing seed yield rather than on the use of annual crops. Now, I couldn't find much information on practitioners of natural systems agriculture, so this is the limited amount of information I have on natural systems agriculture. Now, what is permaculture? Permaculture seems to have been derived from the words permanent culture and permanent agriculture by two Australian scientists, David Holmgren and Bill Mollison, in 1978. And their inspiration for permaculture came from observing wild ecosystems in the Tasmanian rainforests, and it is defined as consciously designed landscapes which mimic the patterns and relationships found in nature while yielding an abundance of food, fiber, and energy for provision of local needs. Now, I interviewed a permaculture specialist from Oregon State University, and you'll hear in more detail what she has to say about permaculture. One of the publications I found on permaculture lists the principles of permaculture as follows, starting with observing and interacting, catching and storing energy, obtaining a yield, applying self-regulation and accepting feedback, use and value of renewable resources and services, producing no waste, designing from patterns to details, integrating rather than segregating, using small and slow solutions, using and valuing diversity, using edges and valuing marginal areas, creatively use and respond to change. So we were able to interview an expert on permaculture from Oregon State University, and we're going to share a clip of what she has to say about permaculture.
Hi everyone, my name is Dow Ryan and I work as an instructor in the Department of Horticulture at Oregon State University. And within the Department of Horticulture, I work in the permaculture program. And my background is in agroecology and sustainable agriculture. I have a master's of science in climate change, agriculture, and food security. And I work a lot in the kind of in-between world between regenerative agriculture, organic agriculture, and permaculture. So I'm excited to speak with you about some of the distinctions and overlaps between all these different systems.
So, how would you define permaculture?
Well, permaculture is a design system that seeks to integrate human needs with the natural ecosystem. And that's kind of like the shortest definition. But one of the things that we look at from an agricultural perspective is all of the inputs from water to nutrients, climatic factors, how we can work with them and enhance them in the course of also achieving a yield of agricultural products.
So, what are the principles and practices of permaculture, the main ones or the general ones?
You know, we often say there's, 10, between 10 or to 12, depending on who you ask. Um, but some of the main ones that we're kind of looking at a lot is stacking functions is one that we talk about a lot, which basically means that when you're making a decision about, how to plant or where to plant something, think about getting as many ecological and yield functions out of that decision as possible. So it's really like breaking out of the mindset of just uh, you know making a decision based on one outcome and really thinking about multiple outcomes, especially ecological outcomes. Like, we should situate our decision making within the context of the ecological framework that we're working in and always be seeking to enhance it rather than degrade it. And so that's kind of another principle that we talk about a lot is, everything that we do, we should be using biological resources as much as possible. So, if we need a fence, say, you know, there's a lot of options available nowadays that you can just go and buy fencing. As a farmer myself, of course, I'd buy fencing, but I'm also thinking about ways that I could potentially achieve that using a biological system, so a hedgerow, perhaps, or some other living fence or that maybe produces food, or creates a wildlife corridor, produces willow for biomass utilization. So kind of thinking a few layers out and of, you want one thing, but how can that thing that you want achieve multiple yields and that are beneficial ecologically?
Right. And then you mentioned like 10 or 12 principles. Can you name some of them or you
Um,
just, yeah, okay.
Well, the first one is observation. So we always really encourage people to take what we call, at least at first, a beginner's mind. And even, if people are highly trained in agronomy or botany, think about try to approach it first off, the situation, the site, the decision that you're making with a beginner's mind. Um, and then, um, so stacking functions is one. Another one is every element on a site should have multiple functions. So when you're thinking about placing like a tool shed, it's not just a tool shed, it's a water catchment feature. It's potentially a sun trap. It's something that could provide thermal mass to heat a greenhouse. There's all of these different things that it could do if you situate it correctly, and also thinking about the flows of energy and resources that go to it, and how, you kind of map that out in the course of a permaculture design to really figure out what the best location is and how it can serve the greatest function. Because if you're, investing a bunch of money into building something like that, you want to make sure that it's as functional as possible and isn't just kind of a random feature in the landscape, which is pretty common with more conventional landscape architecture design. It's kind of like we want a house or we want a garden, but we might not be taking into account, this is a historic wetland and it gets super wet in the winter. So, if we know that in the beginning and we kind of are taking time observing, collecting data, and responding to those natural factors, we can make really well-informed decisions about placement of elements like orchards or garden beds or things like that.
And now that we have so many different variations of ecological farming systems such as organic, biodynamic, regenerative. How do you think permaculture is different from these systems, or like are they similar in some respect?
I think, many of the principles are fairly similar. One of the things that attracted me to permaculture, my educational background is in organic farming. And as I was being trained in that, like I went to UC Santa Cruz and did the agroecology program there many years ago. Um, the question of water, as an example, it was like, oh, we get city water here. And that was kind of the end of that conversation. I mean, we learned about irrigation, but the question of if we had to design this in a way that utilized water from this site or this landscape, how would this be different? And that's a huge question, especially, in the West Coast. I live up in Oregon and I work with water systems a lot, passive water harvesting, active water harvesting. It's a huge concern as we, uh, deal with increasingly hot and dry summers, droughts, etc. Um, so that's a big feature. I would say permaculture now, I think, differentiates itself in like really thinking about the whole system of a landscape, um, and trying as much as possible, then, within reason, to address some of these things in the implementation of, obtaining vegetables or fruit or whatever it might be. So I think it goes a little bit farther. With the water question, I think a lot of people tend to also think about closing nutrient loops in a permaculture system. And biodynamics, I think, does a really good job of that too. Like if you're certified biodynamic, you have to produce 80% of your fertility on site. That's huge. Even compared to, organic, certified organic, there's not really anything in the certification structure about that piece. So many people are importing compost. And the question of, well, where does that come from? And what kind of environmental impacts does that have? If it's coming from factory farm chicken, which is the case for a lot of organic farmers, not that it's good or bad, it's just thinking it through the long-term sustainability of that. And also, could you bring some of those resources and needs closer in or grow them on the farm or on the site? There's a lot of interest and focus in permaculture on like perennial nitrogen fixers and nitrogen fixing plants in general, being integrated into the system and used as kind of like a perennial cropping and what we call chop and drop system, where you're growing plants specifically for their nitrogen fixing and, chopping their vegetation, similar to cover cropping, but, there's a lot of plants that will grow for years and you can chop their vegetation, they slough off the nitrogen, they regrow. So you're kind of like growing your fertility in place, especially in like perennial systems like orchards. So there's just some kind of, I would say, more whole systems thoughts around those kinds of factors in permaculture.
So is there like in organic systems, you have like a certification system? Do you have a similar thing in permaculture?
Not for land. So one of the things that I do at Oregon State is we teach what's called the Permaculture Design Certification course. So that's a 72-hour minimum kind of curriculum where you learn how to design a site and you kind of use these concepts to apply to your particular site in the course that we run at Oregon State. At least that's how we set it up. So there's kind of people that have been trained in this, but there's not a land-based certification.
So like the produce that comes out of the farm is not certified like organic or certified permaculture or something like that?
No, there's nothing like that.
So regenerative agriculture, like there are so many definitions of regenerative agriculture on the internet and also in the text and published papers. One definition I'm going to use here, this is not the only definition, but one definition I'm using here is an approach to farming that uses soil conservation as the entry point to regenerate and contribute to multiple provisioning, regulating, and supporting ecosystem services with the objective that this will enhance not only the environmental but also the social and economic dimensions of sustainable food production. So you can see that even this definition of regenerative agriculture is pretty similar to some of the other definitions for the alternative forms of agriculture. Social, economic dimensions, they all seem to be a common theme. And I looked at the principles of regenerative agriculture that was available on the publication from the Rodale Institute. They have 7 principles, and they all start with a P, as you can see there: pluralism, protection, purity, performance, peace, potential, and progress. Now, rather than discussing each of these, you may want to go to the website of Rodale Institute and see how they elaborate these principles further. Now, there's also another form of regenerative agriculture, and it's called regenerative organic agriculture. Now, this system combines the principles of organic agriculture, regenerative agriculture, and carbon farming. And again, this is from the text that I could access. So, the goal is to fight anthropogenic climate change and to save the global topsoil. So it is the use of regenerative principles, carbon farming principles, and organic farming practices as well, combined into one. So they also have a, just like the organic farming system, they also have a regenerative organic certification program, and it is also based on certain standards, just like the organic certification system. And it's also certified or based on USDA certification standards. But 3 major pillars of regenerative organic is added, and these pillars include soil health, land management, animal welfare, and fairness, farm worker fairness. Now, we interviewed a farmer, or I should say a practitioner, who has both the regenerative agriculture and a regenerative organic agriculture system that he is involved in, and you will hear his comments in the next clip.
My name's Scott Park, and the farm that I've been started back in 1974 is in Meridian, California, which is 50 miles north of Sacramento.
Very nice. All right. Why have you been an organic farmer for so long?
I've been an organic farmer for, in a way, 40 years. 1985, I started changing. 1990, I started dropping a lot of chemicals. 1992, I started dropping synthetic nitrogen. But first generation farmer, it's taken a long time to transition, but we haven't used a chemical for any synthetic for 15 years. On farming about 1,500 acres of a wide range of crops, from processing tomatoes to rice, wheat, corn, a lot of vine seed. And the reason that I transitioned is multiple, but I was seeing too many negatives on the ground. I didn't want to worry about it with my crew on spraying, and then it's just sort of built on itself that actually it's a much simpler way to farm. Okay, so we currently have about 1,800, all our fields except for one that we're transitioning in, we have regenerative organic certified. And the reason that we went, it was not our impulse, it was encouraged by buyers. And the buyers, this started in 2021, and since then we've brought in all our fields. All the crops we grow are regenerative organic certified, and they were encouraged by buyers, not by us. We did not have to change anything to qualify to be regenerative organic certified. Okay, so what's the difference between regenerative and organic, or regenerative organic certified? So the crux of the difference between regenerative and organic is, I think everyone knows, organic, you're just using natural inputs. That's the crux of it. Regenerative now can mean a wide range of things, such as you can use chemicals and be regenerative. Why the term regenerative is being used is it's more of an emphasis on the impact on the soil and how much carbon, like there's Soil Carbon Initiative, SCI, there's A Greener World, there's Regenerative Organic Certified, which we are, which is pushed by Rodale. And the regenerative is different than regenerative organic. Regenerative organic is just what it says, whereas just regenerative, for example, Gabe Brown's Understanding Ag and Regenified, he's encouraging principles such as grazing, no tillage, keeping the ground covered, life in the soil, growing cover crops, and context, which is that each farm system is built to where it is. Regenerative Organic Certified, the difference there is there's more emphasis on social fairness and the environment along with the soil. They're more concerned on the total regeneration per se of the world, and simply Regenified is more of an emphasis on that specific field of having the soil improve, and you do it through grazing, cover crops, covering the field, and minimum tillage, and adjusting it to fit your environment. So yeah, as I said, we didn't have to change to fit the parameters of Regenerative Organic Certified, because we've given value to taking care of the crew and the environment for a long time, and we've been organic certified going back to 1995. So it didn't take much, but so we have a very holistic attitude that, you know, why do farmers do what they do? And so much of it is yeah, I want to get a good crop, but how do I get it? How do I control pests? How do I keep my nutrients up? How do I get the highest yield? And we don't emphasize the yield side. We emphasize trying to create as natural of a system and letting nature do our problem solving, instead of stripping nature and stripping the borders and neutering the soil, not having anything live or not having residue on the ground and what have you, and then you fill the inputs. So we're almost the exact opposite of normal farming, that we want as many natural inputs. We want cover crops, we want residue on the ground, we want grazing, although we graze totally when it fits us. The idea is that nature seeks a balance, and it doesn't let insects, whatever, in the ground. It seems to keep disease. So we've been fairly effective, I'd say very effective, in the insect disease and nutrition aspects of our farm by developing as natural of a system as possible. Where we have had our problems, excuse the truck, where we've had our problems is on weeds, but we're still like really good on weeds compared to most organic farmer, and we're getting better, and we're completely open to anybody who has anything to say of a way to do it better than we're doing. We're not fixed in any way, and we're learning every day, for certainly every year, better ways to do things. But like we just say, we have all this natural resource, why not make it better every year? Because that's what's generating our income. That's what's making our livelihood. And getting the system as healthy as possible is a way to make money. Plus, it's nice to be developing the environment better. the question is regenerative worth it? And it certainly is worth it, because the farm practices give your farm a future. You don't have a declining of the quality of the soil. You don't have a buildup of problems happening. And so every year your farm is getting better, and that's only good business. So regenerative farming I think is the way to go. I think every farmer should do it. The question is, do you get paid for it? And most farming in California is instant gratification. How much money can I make this year? And I'm talking about next year. And that's where some of the problems come on going into regenerative, because this is long-term thinking. This is, sometimes you don't see impacts from cover crops or getting your crop rotation or doing less tillage. All that takes time. So you have to believe that what you're doing is worth it in the long run. Regenerative is geared toward your profit and the environment and your grandkids' life down the road. It is not geared for this year.
Moving on to agroecology. Agroecology seems to be an overarching theme of all these ecological systems. And the definition that I found was that it's the study of ecological processes applied to agricultural production systems, in a summary. And the term seems to be used imprecisely and may refer to a science, a movement, or a practice. So literature also says that the field of agroecology is not associated with any one particular method of farming, whether it be organic or conventional, and the principles of agroecology can be applied to any form of agriculture. So they don't have any organic standards, or the certification standards, to be more specific. They do not, say no chemicals um, are allowed. Rather, the principle seems to be more towards reducing the use of synthetic chemicals, rather than having a complete ban on them. And the United Nations, the FAO committee, actually 197 FAO member countries got together in December 2019 and put together the 10 elements of agroecology. And this is not an attempt to define, but to identify the elements as they put it. So the 10 elements include diversity, co-creation and sharing knowledge, synergies, efficiency, recycling, resilience, human and social values, culture and food traditions, responsible governance, circular and solidarity economy. So if you want to get more information, you can go to the publication that is freely available on the net. But we were able to interview Dr. Stephen Gleisman, who was with the University of California, Santa Cruz Agroecology Center for a long time. And here are some of his comments in the next clip.
My name is Steve Gleisman. I'm a emeritus professor of agroecology in the Environmental Studies Department at UC Santa Cruz, as well as a farmer with my wife, growing dry farmed certified organic wine grapes and olives in the Cuyama Valley of northern Santa Barbara County. So both a retired faculty member and a currently operating farmer.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. We are in the process of preparing a video on comparing the various alternative farming systems, and we come across a lot of terminologies like agroecology, biodynamic, regenerative. So the purpose of this video is to kind of differentiate the different terminologies or to see the commonalities between them. So can you please define agroecology for us?
Yes, for me, agroecology is it's a broad field of science that is grounded in sort of ecological ecosystem thinking, sort of the science of how nature works applied to agriculture. And it links together with agronomy, which is basically the science of how to grow food. So we're linking both ecology and agronomy together under the concept of agroecology. But agroecology is much more than just the practices of farming. It's also valuing and working very closely with local knowledge, indigenous, traditional, local knowledge that's grounded in practical experience, putting the two together, the science of how it works, the practice of how it works, and then uniting both of those in a process we like to call the social movements for change in food systems generally. So it's a interdisciplinary field of interacting parts that really is focused on action-oriented, change-oriented processes in food systems.
So what would be some of the important practices in agroecology?
Well, gosh, they're all based on what I like to think of as the FAO 10 principles of agroecology that were published a few years back and linked with the high-level panel of experts, 13 elements of agroecology. And these are everything from farming practices at the plot and soil level that build and sustain soil health, all the way up to and through the food chain to consumers who are able to have access to healthy, socially appropriate food at a reasonable cost. So it's the whole food chain. And those practices, gosh, if I think of how practices in organic agriculture and regenerative agriculture, in what we might call climate smart agriculture, conservation agriculture, or even sustainable intensification of agriculture, mostly are focused on farming practices. They don't take a whole food systems approach. And that is really kind of the basic difference between agroecology and the rest of these. All those other fields build, are parts of what we build on with agroecology, important practices. But we go beyond the practices to look at the ecology and of the entire food system. So we're looking for both sustainable and just food systems is an end result of applying agroecological principles and elements. Just today, I went to our local farmers market in Santa Cruz, and I saw agroecology in many different ways. I saw signs at each of the booths that say, "We grow what we sell." I saw signs that said they were certified organic farmers, and most of them are small farmers. And I also saw agroecology in the fact that it's a community-based food system where the two most important parts of the food system interact. The people who grow the food and the people who eat the food have a direct relationship. And through agroecology, we're really talking about establishing relationship-based food systems. An incredible diversity of crops, fruits, meats, and processed products, all produced within a reasonable distance from the market. Sustainable caught fish with local fisher folks. Honey direct from local beekeepers that also contribute to maintaining more dynamics in pollination mechanisms at an urban level. Local cheeses from cows, sheep, and goats, raised using sustainable grazing practices. Free-range pasture-raised chickens, locally processed by small arbiters. Baked goods made from local heritage grains. Dry farm tomatoes grown from stored rain-fed soil moisture. The local knife sharpener even could be considered part of our agroecosystem. EBT being used to purchase local food, making it more available for disadvantaged members of our community. And even local musicians setting a tone for a community atmosphere, leading to, in Santa Cruz, 3 permanent year-round markets within the city limits every week. all of that to me is agroecology and the practices that make it happen.
Although you covered this to some extent, there's still confusion on what is the difference between agroecology and organic farming and regenerative farming now. So how would you say agroecology is different or similar to these systems?
Well, for me, organic agriculture and regenerative agriculture are important sets of practices, especially at the farm level, for ensuring sustainable production systems that are ecologically based. Agroecology builds on those, depends on those practices, but goes way beyond it as we think about the entire food system, from the farm field and the practices that make it sustainable there, all the way up to the table where the food is consumed, and all of the steps in between to get food from the farm to the table, so that it's just, it's accessible, it's fair, and it leads to health in all parts of the food system, not just in the soil, but in the people who are the important element at the social level in that system. So it's bigger. It's the whole food system. Too often, organic is just thought of as substituting conventional inputs for alternative inputs. Regenerative agriculture focuses a lot on regenerating the soil health and maintaining the soil health. But with agroecology, we build on things like that and really consider how the entire food system needs to be transformed to meet the needs of all components of the food system.
Thank you. Is there anything you would like to add that could be of interest to the students?
Well, gosh, another thing that I always think about is, each one of them can be an example of how to contribute to building a more sustainable and just food system, just through the way they make choices about what they eat, where they get it from, how much they know about who the farmer is that produced that food, and what the impacts of whatever they buy are on that entire system. They can really be the examples we need for bringing the transformative change we need in food systems using agroecology.
So, in conclusion, the overarching theme of these alternative agricultural systems seems to be very similar in their goals of developing self-sustaining, environmentally friendly, and socially justified production systems. However, it seems each of these systems seem to have a community of adopters and practitioners dedicated to the philosophies and the principles of the founders of these systems. These farming systems seem to be, they seem to prefer to have their own identity and identify themselves as unique based on who founded them and the original philosophy. So, in essence, these farming systems are community movements that are deeply rooted in their philosophies. So, hopefully, this video clarified some of the similarities and differences between these systems, and I also hope that you enjoyed the interviews from the real world practitioners of these systems who were featured in this video. So thank you very much for your attention.